Greetings, everyone. I have a 5mm kidney stone lodged in my body currently. I went to the ER a couple days ago because it was causing me more pain than the average kidney stone does, because I get these things a lot. Even though that was so painful, it took morphine and eventually Percocet to help dull the edge. It was still not as painful as watching the abhorrent cinematic garbage that is Pureflix's Unplanned. In case you haven't heard of this movie, this is Pureflix's first R-rated film, and it's an anti-abortion movie. Now, Pureflix and the producers have made kind of a big stink about this movie getting an R, saying that, oh, it was just given an R because, you know, the MPAA doesn't like our anti-abortion message. Well, regardless of the legitimate issues that many people have with the MPAA, they do have an appeals process you can go through if you don't agree with the rating they give you, and if you don't want to cut anything from your film. They never took this movie to appeal. And it's kind of funny because recently there's another R-rated evangelical Christian movie called The Reliant that hasn't been released yet, but it was given an R, and they did go through the appeals process, and they lost. That's like a post-apocalyptic pro-Second Amendment Jesus movie, I guess. I don't know. Kevin Sorbo's in it. But this one they didn't even bother, so I think that's just to give themselves persecution complex, as the God's Not Dead people love to do. And yeah, that's about it. I'll go into why this movie has an R rating in a bit. So this movie is directed and written by the two guys who wrote the first two God's Not Dead films. Not the third one, which was kind of not bad, or at least not good, but not as bad as the other ones. No, it's from the two guys who made the bug nuts crazy God's Not Deads 1 and 2. And, oh boy. First of all, I should say that, I wasn't sure if I was going to go see this movie because I no longer work for a movie theater, so it's not for free, and it's definitely not playing at the Alamo Drafthouse, so it's not part of my season pass, so I did have to pay money to go see this. Thankfully, if you just have if you just create a dummy email account, you can sign up for Atom tickets, and if you pay for a senior ticket instead of an adult ticket, because they don't check, and use the $5 off coupon that's always available, you can pretty much see any movie for about $5 change. So I did that. It's still money going to Pureflix. I don't like that, but I'm probably going to make a donation to Planned Parenthood after seeing this movie for more than that, and alleviate my own conscience there. But I decided that Pureflix's first R-rated movie, and the last few Christian movies I did see in the theater weren't terribly bad. God's Not Dead 3, Case for Christ. They weren't at the Let There Be Light or the God's Not Dead 2 level of horrendousness or the War Room level. So I figured I should probably see this for myself, especially since it just came out today. I'm recording this on the Sunday of its opening weekend, that it has the second highest opening weekend for a Pureflix movie. So I'm like, oh boy, this thing's probably going to lag out. It's going to make like 30 million domestic, and it's going to make Pureflix do more R-rated or anti-abortion movies, isn't it? Ugh, creepy. So this movie is about a woman named Abby Johnson. Now, the story the film tells is that, despite coming from a completely pro-life family, she ends up working for Planned Parenthood for almost a decade before turning coat and becoming an anti-abortion activist. The film seems to want us to believe this is because she saw something and it disgusted her and she had moral objections and then twisted. But I'm pretty sure she was just reprimanded by HR and decided to quit and became a disgruntled employee and went against them out of revenge. But I'll get to that. So, the film opens where she's the director of a local abortion clinic somewhere in, like, Texas, a little outside of Houston, it seems like. And even though she's the clinic director and doesn't perform the operations, she's called into the room for some reason. So it opens with this scene where this young girl is getting an abortion, and she seems to be, like, struggling a bit, almost like it's being performed against her will. And then you have, like, the doctor being super callous and everything, where he's, like, taking the vacuum and sucking out the fetus. It's like, beat me up, Scotty! And then it shows the ultrasound image, and it's a terrible CGI view of, like, this isn't real. This is, I think it was in the 70s or 80s, there was an anti-abortion short documentary called The Silent Scream, and it purported to show an ultrasound of a fetus being aborted, and that when it came out, it looked like it was screaming to show that the fetus was feeling pain. It was completely fake, it's not real or anything, but it seems like the opening scene of this movie, because it's shown in this fake digital ultrasound, that this baby's like squirming and like desperately trying to cling onto the womb as it's being sucked out. It seems like they're going for like what The Silent Scream did, because I'm not sure how many people remember that that anti-abortion propaganda movie. And then she like runs, and Abby runs to like the bathroom and like vomits out of sickness. And one of the other nurses is like, "Can we get you a doctor?" And she's like, "I don't want to see that doctor right now." Their flashes to fucking 8 years earlier. And so the movie makes no attempt to de-age anybody, so it's still, 8 to 10 years earlier, and it's still the same actress looking exactly the same, like 35 years old or whatever she is. Where I guess she moves into an apartment to go to college, and she hooks up with this good old boy who kind of looks and feels like a Chris Kyle type person, but even sleazier. So he knocks her up. And then he's like, "Don't worry, I know a place in Houston that can take care of this." And she's like, "How do you know a place in Houston?" He's like, and it's like, oh god, this guy's knocked up so many women and gotten so many abortions done for his unwanted fetuses. And then he just drops her off at the abortion clinic, and she gets the procedure. And then she ends up marrying this dude. And then I guess he cheats on her and she's gonna divorce him. But she also finds out she's pregnant again. And the movie slips in a sort of insidious anti-birth control message, because, this is like an evangelical Christian movie, they're against all that shit. Where it's like she's on the pill, but the pill didn't work. It's like, well, unless there's human error, the pill's gonna work. So she goes to the clinic to get the morning after pill, or the abortion pill, RU480 something or other, I forget. Someone can correct me in the comments. And it's funny, she goes there to get the pill, and it shows, like, the nurse behind the counter just callously, like, counting $100 bills like she doesn't give a shit. It's like, we're only doing this for the money. That's gonna be an ongoing motif, a leitmotif in this film. Where she's like, "Oh yeah, you're just gonna feel some cramping or whatever, yeah." And so she's like, "Alright." And then she goes home, and she takes, like, the pill and, like, naps, and then she wakes up in horrible pain, and then... Alright, so this movie is rated R, and there's a question about whether it should be rated R. So, it's basically rated R because of 3 key scenes. The first is that opening scene. It's not like the opening scene, it's like the second or third scene in the movie, but it's before, like, the opening credits. Where it shows the first abortion, and the girl is, like, struggling as if she's being aborted against her will, kind of. Because you do see some blood, like, splashing up inside the suction unit and all this stuff. And there's a later scene in the movie where, like, a father's, like, forcing his teenage daughter to have an abortion, and then during the operation, her uterus is punctured by the doctor, and so when she's in the recovery room, and by the way, the recovery room is full of a bunch of, like, drugged-out women who look like they've been lobotomized, or like they're, like, jigsaw victims about to wake up, they're like, It's like completely unrealistic depiction to make it look like a horror movie, and she's bleeding out because of this, and so there's her like hemorrhaging a little bit, and there's a trail of blood. But the main scene that probably caused this to be an R rating is the abortion that happens when she takes the pill, where she's bleeding out, she's on the toilet, you see blood like dripping down the bowl of the toilet, and then she goes into the shower, and blood clots are coming out of her and all that stuff. I'm not going to say that's unrealistic, because I've heard stories of people who have gone through this, and they do get like heavy clotting, and it is a long process. But it's clearly done to make it look horrific and inspire a negative reaction in the audience, because this whole thing is to make the audience like disgusted or morally object to this stuff. More than most Pureflix films, which are just kind of preaching to the choir, this one does seem like it's kind of sort of trying to turn pro-choicers into pro-lifers, but its tactics are fairly transparent in doing that. So, yeah, she does this, and despite that, she still ends up working for Planned Parenthood. Like, it doesn't scar her that much. Where she ends up going to, like, some sort of, like, college fair or something, and, like, a woman in, like, a very, like, Southern belle, like, howdy-hoo, Linda Lou, like, country, like, cowboy hat and stuff, like, recruits her, and she ends up being one of those security escorts at clinics that walk women in as the anti-abortion protesters are berating them or whatever. So the film attempts to to start a difference between the anti-abortion protesters who, like, yell and demean these women and say you should have kept your legs shut and harlot and all that stuff, and the good anti-abortion protesters who just sort of, like, are friendly and smile and they pray and, you know, talk to their imaginary friend and everything. By the way, I did wear this There Is No God Soviet propaganda shirt to the theater to see this movie. No one seemed to pick up on it or care. But, I don't know, it was just my little, like, fuck you. But anyway, and they're sort of trying to show this delineation. And later in the movie, they do mention the murder of abortion doctor George Tiller, who was shot by an anti-abortion zealot while he was actually in church. I'd written a report about that for one of my paralegal classes back in the day. Interesting case. But anyway, so she ends up becoming this sort of, like, escort person, and eventually she ends up becoming a counselor, where she's supposed to counsel people as far as, you know, do you want to go through with this and all that stuff. So what this movie does is basically slander Planned Parenthood, where it does pay lip service to what people like me and others who support Planned Parenthood would say, which is that, you know, it's not just, like, a chugging abortion factory. They're there to provide, like, mammograms and contraception and you know, all that stuff, and generally other types of female or reproductive services and stuff. You know, they hand out condoms and stuff. They're not just, like, an abortion factory or some shit. But as the movie goes on, well, like, stop. So the boss of this clinic is a Pureflix villain in the same mold of Ray Wise in God's Not Dead 2. Now, much love to Ray Wise. He helped me propose to my fiancée. Love him in Twin Peaks. Big fan of Ray Wise. Very nice guy in person. But his role in God's Not Dead 2 was basically if Satan were an ACLU lawyer. And in this one, the villain of the film is the woman who runs the local clinic. And she is like the Devil Wears Prada meets a abortion zealot. Like someone who is like really pro just killing them babies kind of stuff. So, for instance, after the main character gets divorced from the Chris Kyle type dude, she ends up meeting this other like pro-lifer. The actor who plays her husband, probably the worst actor in the movie. He has the most stilted, horrible line delivery. And these aren't necessarily the best lines. These are the God's Not Dead 2 people writing this, so they can't write dialogue very well. But some of the actors are kind of okay-ish, where they can paper it on. Like, the main actress isn't terribly bad. She's, like, of soap opera or Hallmark Channel quality. Some of the men are actually much worse. The man who leads the anti-abortion group, the friendly anti-abortion group, and the man who plays the main character's husband are particularly very horrible with their line delivery. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the guy who plays the head of the anti-abortion group was the actual real guy. But she ends up getting pregnant while she works at the abortion clinic, and the boss is like, you know, we can take care of that if you want. like she's just so gung-ho about aborting fetuses that she's not even wishing like her congratulations or anything. She just wants to like kill them babies. It's like Russell Crowe and Noah. He just wants to kill them babies. So, but she is in like that for the whole movie. She's like this, like, snarling, foaming at the mouth, like, I just want to abort them, like, capitalist. Which is weird because this movie goes out of its way to portray Planned Parenthood as a for-profit business that is just calling itself non-profit in order for tax purposes. You know, like an evangelical megachurch. which is odd. So it tries to portray Planned Parenthood the way that people like me would view many churches, which is that they are a for-profit, money-grubbing organization that uses tax loopholes by calling themselves a church in order to avoid paying taxes on their ill-gotten gains. Unfortunately, Planned Parenthood is actually a non-profit organization. So, like, for instance, later on in the film, the main character is, like, at a conference for, like, a Planned Parenthood, like, business, like, annual conference or whatever. She gets an award. And our villain is up there being like, we're gonna build this new facility that can do abortions up to 24 weeks. Oh, and by the way, to make more profits, we'll be doubling our abortion capacity. So, you know, it's the whole thing about, you know, the actual Planned Parenthood doesn't want to increase the number of abortions. They just want abortion to be available as an option, but they'd still like contraception and other things to reduce the need for abortions. But this movie's portraying it as in abortions equal profit, so we want to increase abortions to increase our money. You know, the same thing like that fucking Acorn guy who did the edited behind-the-scenes videos about Planned Parenthood. That's the whole right-wing idea that they're doing this all for money and shit. And there's a funny scene where after she gets promoted from a counselor to running this local clinic, our main character, it's compared to like selling a timeshare. Like she's trying to upsell abortions on people. It's like, you know, if you wait to book this, it's going to be more expensive. But if you book now, it's at a cheaper rate. I mean, you've already spent $150 on the ultrasound, right? Like they're a fucking used car salesman trying to sell you a new abortion. It's like, you know, this abortion's barely been used. Nice interior. We'll throw in the Rain-X coating. It's really, really bad. Like that's the whole point. The whole point of the movie is really to paint Planned Parenthood and abortion providers as money-grubbing, profit-obsessed capitalist organizations, and the anti-abortion group as being bifurcated into the crazies, which are only shown really once in the movie. There's just this one guy who looks like Guy Fieri who's yelling at a woman from behind a fence. And the friendly ones who just kind of stand there and pray and are like, hi, how's it going? And have a friendly rapport with the people who work there, which seems like bullshit. but okay, whatever. That's the main thrust of the movie. But it uses this Addie person as the turncoat, basically. Just like a lot of these movies love to have atheists who then switch to become Jesus freaks. Kevin Sorbo in Let There Be Light, he plays like a Richard Dawkins type person who becomes a Jesus freak. Or Kevin Sorbo in God's Not Dead as he's hit by the car and dies. So that's the thing, but it's about this woman's journey where she's surrounded by a pro-life family and a pro-life husband, which already kind of raises red flags that they'd be okay with this or that she wouldn't already have some pro-life leanings. And then even though she's already had one surgical abortion and one chemically or medically induced abortion, she's still okay with abortion until she views someone else's through an ultrasound. It's kind of weird. And it also portrays the people who perform the abortions as being, like, super callous about, and not, like, they don't have any sort of sadness or any sort of gravitas about the importance of the situation. You know, they portray almost everyone. There's one black single mother who comes in who's portrayed as being totally fine going in to get her abortion, as that woman's mother yells, like, in Medea fashion from behind a fence, like, no, no, no! It's kind of bad. But aside from her, almost every other woman, most of them white, I think there's one Asian, but most of these, like, young white women who, their hair is put in braids and stuff to make them look even younger, they all seem to be doing it against their will. Now, there's the one girl whose father's forcing her in the movie, and the film is absolutely portraying her as getting an abortion against her will, and then being talked into it by our main character. But a lot of the other women are portrayed as being reluctant and sort of going into it. Now, I'm not to say that no one's going in there gung-ho about getting an abortion for the most part, but to portray them as being almost like cajoled or convinced against their own better instincts, that the movie's definitely stacking the deck on that one. But it's weird the way they portray this main character, where she has no real problem with this until 8 years into this job, where she's held 3 separate positions with this thing, and then she has this final turn. Like, there's even one scene in the film where there's the POC room, the products of conception room. And according to this film, that's where, you know, the doctors go over all the aborted matter to make sure that nothing was left behind that can make the woman sick or anything. And one of the nurses, Kelsey's like, no, it's the parts of children room. And it's like, oh, God. And then they go into this room, and there's a petri dish with a little silicone baby in it that is obviously much bigger and more developed than any aborted fetus actually would, and definitely more intact. And then they're picking it up with these tweezers and everything, and their main character's fine, and the Devil Wears Prada woman who runs it is like, you're the first person I've brought in here who hasn't cried. Maybe this is your job. Yes. I've laughed more at the villain of this movie than I have in quite a long time. Of course, I couldn't laugh that loud because, so, my fiancé and I saw this kind of as a lark. And even though it was a 7:40 show on a Sunday night, it was pretty crowded. In fact, sitting next to me was this one guy who came alone. So he was technically sitting in the seat that my fiancé bought. It's an assigned seating thing. And she was going to move over, but then my fiancé just sat on the other side of me and whatever. So this guy, male, came to see it alone, wore like a weird trench coat. He kept looking away during the like gross scenes, like during the opening abortion scene or during the blood clot scene or even the tweezer on the baby, silicone baby scene. Love to show that guy a Serbian film if he was creeped out by that. And this, anytime, I don't talk during these movies, I usually hold my mouth if I really need to laugh or anything, but my fiancé couldn't help but make some comments here and there to me, whispered, not like obnoxious loud or anything, but he kept looking over like, like this guy was clearly not watching this movie ironically, and he gave me such, like, I'm a right-winger gonna shoot up an abortion clinic vibes. Like, I will not be surprised if in less than 5 years I see that this guy's committed some sort of right-wing, fucking mass murder thing. That guy was fucking creepy. So, anyway, I'm glad that this lone male who came alone to this movie cares so much about women's reproductive health that he came to see this and not for the purpose of laughing at it like I did. But anyway, yeah, a lot of that scene like that is like brought in to rile up people like that. I should probably mention the other redneck couple that was sitting a few seats down on the other side near my fiancé, and one person actually like took their entire shoes off so they just had their bare feet on the recliner. Fucking gross trailer trash. That's the kind of genuine audience that goes to these piece of shit movies. I digress. So, I forget that after the scene in the Planned Parenthood conference, the Devil Wears Prada woman like pulls Abby aside and is like, you know, fast food places don't make their profit from the burgers. They make it from the side items, the fries and such. Abortions are our fries. They pave our bottom line. And then the main character's like, but we're not working for profit. We're a non-profit organization or something like that. And she's like, non-profit is just a tax loophole. It's just like that smacking lips evil. It's something only the God's Not Dead people can write about just basic liberals. Or this one scene, it's toward the end, after the main character's already flipped to the anti-abortion side, and they're talking through the fence, and the guy's like, and the woman's like, do you know who our funders are? Soros, Gates, Buffett. It's like, of course you have to throw in fucking right-wing George Soros fear and shit. I mean, later on, when she joins the anti-abortion people and Planned Parenthood sues her, they hire, like, a billboard lawyer, and the actor who plays him looks like fucking Tate Donovan, of all people. Oh, I should also mention another thing that made me hate the main character is, so the main character and her husband are going out to eat, like, Mexican food or something, and they're trying to decide on a movie to watch when they get home, and she wants to watch I think Gone with the Wind, and he wants to watch The Goonies, and then they finally come to a compromise, and their compromise movie is 300. I fucking hate the movie 300. It's an awful, ugly, horrible movie. So of course it's like, oh, of course you agree on 300, you fucking Jesus freaks. So I really wish we could go back to the days where we fed Christians to the lions. Anyway, oh man, I fucking hated this. It's also funny, the main character dresses like Scarlett O'Hara for Halloween. I'm like, oh, so these are at least the Christians that are okay with Halloween, because some aren't okay with that. One of the trailers in front of this movie was the sun is also a star, and that trailer for that begins like with like the universe began 13.8 billion years ago or whatever, and I was like, in my head I'm like, you know, some people in this theater probably don't agree with that. They probably think it's 6,000 years old. Some of these people probably think they're just fucking flat. There's a funny scene in the movie where a hurricane is hitting Houston, and so they can't perform the abortions they normally perform on Saturday, because the movie makes a big deal about how Saturday is the only day of the week that they perform abortions at this clinic. So they're like, oh, well, in order to prevent people having to rebook in 2 weeks because of this hurricane, we'll try and move them all to Friday. So they end up, like, getting 2 abortion doctors in there, and they open 2. And so there's this montage of them just loading, like, 10, like, I think, like, 36 women into this clinic to get them all aborted in a day before the hurricane happens. And the movie has, like, upbeat music. So I'm like, if this movie wants me to think abortion's bad, why is this a peppy, upbeat montage about getting them all aborted in time? What's funny is, the theater that was next to the theater playing this movie was playing Us, so occasionally the soundtrack to Us would bleed into our theater, and sometimes it fit with the movie. So what am I missing? So, it's got an R rating for those 3 scenes. It definitely deserves the R rating for the blood clot scene. I think that's more blood than the APA likes to allow, even with the medical thing. It probably could have gotten away with the first one if they just cut out the shot of, like, the vacuum suck part. And it maybe could have gotten away with the third one because you only see blood sort of dripping between a girl's legs and then as she's being wheeled back into the operating room. Oh, that's right. So, the scene where the daughter who's being forced to get an abortion by her father, she's rushed back into the OR because the doctor perforated her uterus during the original procedure. And our main character's like, oh, we should call 911. And the evil abortion Devil Wears Prada lady is like, we don't do that here. 911 calls are recorded. You know the protest? That never happens here. And the girl ends up saved and it's fine. But it's weird that the movie's portraying that if a patient is dying, they would not call 911 or other doctors. I mean, technically it is an operating thing, and they do have a doctor available, so if it's something of this type, they probably should be able to handle it. Like, abortion providers are legitimate doctors. They do perform surgery and everything. Some of them have ER admittance rights because there's local laws that say they have to. Right-wingers. But, it's weird that they're providing that. It's like, I will let 1,000 patients die before we get more protests. I mean, there are some things I like in the movie. I like that one of the things they do against the abortion protesters outside is they turn on the sprinklers and stuff. Oh, okay. So, there's one scene in the film where the basic, like, the parts of aborted fetuses are being put into these, like, blue plastic collection barrels, like, that people collect rainwater with, and they're being wheeled out. And the anti-abortion people outside is like, can we pray over the barrel? And the guy who's loading the truck is like, this is just a job, man. Here, I got another barrel out there. And then they're, like, praying and trying to lay hands through the fence on these, like, barrels of aborted fetus parts. And I don't know, maybe I just have a sick sense of humor, but I'm just laughing at that bullshit. Fuck. There's a scene toward the end after the main character has a crisis of conscience where she's like, I in my entire time, I probably sat over, like, 32,000 abortions or whatever. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, you know, being as, like, anti-procreation as I am, I mean, I had a vasectomy and everything, I probably would have spun this in a different direction, kind of like Oscar Schindler under Schindler's List. It's like, I could have aborted one more, just one more. I could have used this coffee table and this chair and done an abortion. 6 sense of humor. I don't know. This movie's sort of like the anti If These Walls Could Talk, that abortion rights movie that HBO made back in the 90s. If These Walls Could Talk 2 was about lesbian and LGBT rights, but the first one's about abortion. Demi Moore's in it. It's a really good movie. This is like the anti-version of that. It's probably closer to the mirror image of that than it is to something like Voiceless or some other anti-abortion Christian propaganda movie. And obviously a little bit of Silent Scream. Oh, I should mention, part of this movie's budget was provided by, I think his name's Mike Liddell. He is the founder of MyPillow. You may have seen him on the MyPillow infomercials. The MyPillow box has his face on it. Or even on QVC. He's like a right-wing Christian zealot. So he funded a little bit of this movie, and he's actually in the movie. Toward the end of the movie, I guess the abortion clinic she used to work at closes for whatever reason, and he plays the guy who runs the backhoe, like the Tomcat, like bulldozer thing to pull down the Planned Parenthood sign, which only says Planned Parenthood, doesn't have their logo or anything because, you know, trademark. And it's like, are you ready for this? And then Mr. MyPillow's there like, I've been waiting for this my whole life. And then he just pulls down the sign, everyone fucking cheers and shit. This movie's bad. So, yeah, this movie is morally reprehensible because it does lie about Planned Parenthood and its motives. It portrays abortion in an unrealistic fashion, as well as how people would react to this and the basic medical procedures, how the abortion providers do counseling and stuff like this. It portrays birth control incorrectly. it's basically just lying in order to stack the deck, which we expect. I mean, God's Not Dead didn't understand how philosophy works or philosophy classes. God's Not Dead 2 didn't understand how the legal system worked. And this one, obviously, they didn't have any actual, like, legitimate medical providers have stuff. Now, granted, the woman, this is based on the book, and is the story of the woman who worked for Planned Parenthood, but she obviously has an axe to grind. In the movie, it shows that she's called to corporate headquarters because she's being reprimanded by HR for challenging her boss, the Devil Wears Prada woman, and then her choice to like leave the company kind of happens after that. But watching the movie, it's very clear what actually happened. That she probably, at some point, either her family or whatever, made her switch her opinion, and then she was probably refusing to do tasks that need to be done if you work for a Planned Parenthood because of her faith and some bullshit. So she probably got reprimanded for that, and then she ended up quitting because out of spite and being this disgruntled former worker. She then decided to write this book with its lies and falsely portray how they do things, and then turn it into a money-making thing where she can make money from her book and selling the film rights to Pureflix and going on speaking tours and all this bullshit. Apparently, the closing scroll of the movie says that she ended up having 8 kids. I guess she had 2 abortions. She kept 1. She's only shown ever having 1 kid in the movie. I guess she had another 7 after the shit. Whatever. She's probably fucking quiver full at this point. I'm sure I'm forgetting things about this movie. There was a lot to happen in this, and I was biting my lip and covering my mouth to keep from laughing and distracting the other patrons who were there for non-ironic reasons. As my fiancée was getting more and more angry at the movie, she kept saying things more and more and was kind of louder and louder. But yeah, this movie's pretty bad. This is probably one of the worst Christian movies I've seen in quite a long time. Like, this is more along the this is more on the God's Not Dead 1 or 2, morally and intellectually reprehensible level, as well as poorly made. Aside from one shot, which is sort of a tracking shot behind the wheelchair as the daughter who's being forced by her father, and she's trailing blood, this movie's mostly static medium shots. There's way too many fade-outs. Like, this is a TV movie and they're cutting to commercial-type fade-outs. My fiancé actually leaned over and said, like, why are there so many cuts to black in this thing? But they're actually fade-outs. This movie has a lot of those. Like, I think this is the first movie these guys have directed. They're mostly just screenwriters for Pureflix, and they obviously can't direct. The movie's sort of shot like a TV movie. I mean, it mostly takes place in like 2 or 3 different sets, like the abortion clinic parking lot, and the main character's home. There's not that many more sets beyond that, so I can't imagine the thing costs that much. It seems like it'll make its money back. So it's poorly made. It very much is miscommunicating how abortions happen, as well as the demeanor and tone of abortion providers, and the motives of people who get into this line of work. And then it's drawing a dichotomy between the radical anti-abortion people who yell things and the ones who are more like kind and compassionate, but I'm sure they're assholes too if you actually got out there. So it's also creating that dichotomy as well. It's... The villain is really funny, just her lines of dialogue and how she's just like foaming at the mouth and like just really wants to perform all these abortions for money. She's of the Ray Wise in God's Not Dead 2 or Kevin Sorbo in God's Not Dead 1 level villain. Like the straw man atheist or the straw man abortion provider or the straw man ACLU lawyer villain. I love their horrible villains. They're like something Ayn Rand would have wrote. That's pretty funny. I laughed the most at any time she was on the screen delivering dialogue. It does have slightly better acting than most of these movies have. Again, the main man who runs the anti-abortion group and the man who plays the main character's husband are the 2 worst actors in the movie. Almost all the other actors are serviceable. I kind of like the villain on a not-so-good level. The guy who plays the lawyer is kind of hackneyed, not really good, but still kind of delivering, like, hamming it up kind of funny. And the main actress is fine. She, you know, she's Hallmark movie level quality. Anyway, I think I've been rambling on for like 35 minutes now. I'm sure I'm forgetting way too much more about this movie, but it's awful. Like, if you're curious, like, if you watch these movies for irony, if you watch them to laugh at them and make fun of them, there's a lot of material here. Like, if this theater had been empty, I would have been cracking jokes left and right with my fiancé. Like, this movie has a lot of material for that. More so than something like Case for Christ would, or God's Not Dead 3 would, because those weren't terrible. They were just sort of intellectually reprehensible and stacking the deck kind of stuff. Case for Christ more than God's Not Dead 3. This is not... I'd say this is not so much Let There Be Light level, because that one was really amateurish in how it's made. It probably had worse acting because of Kevin Sorbo's kids. And it's definitely better made than, like, Kirk Cameron Saving Christmas or something, but this is definitely of the God's Not Dead 1 and 2 level. Maybe slightly less funny and slightly less anger-inducing than those, because this one is a lot more transparent in how it's doing things. And it's also, it's not faking as much, it's mostly just faking people's attitudes and demeanors in the actual abortion procedures that are portrayed on film. Whereas God's Not Dead 1, the complete premise of the movie is faulty, as well as God's Not Dead 2. Like, the movie fails from premise 1. I probably enjoyed and laughed at God's Not Dead 1 and 2 more, but it also may have been because I wasn't free to just throatily laugh, because I saw God's Not Dead 1 at home, and I saw God's Not Dead 2 in a theater, but no one was sitting near me, so I was able to laugh a bit more freely. And Saving Christmas and Let There Be Light I saw in theaters completely alone, so I could just laugh out loud and talk to myself as much as I wanted. But I'd say if you see these movies, if you watch them ironically, this is one to definitely see. Like, you could skip God's Not Dead 3 or Case for Christ, but this is one to definitely, you can wait till it comes on video or whatever, or try to, or try to sneak in for free during a late night show and then make fun of it. Have a couple of shots with your friends and make fun of this kind of thing. It's that kind of movie. There's a lot of material to make fun of and kind of also get angry over and stuff. This is one of those ones to see. And out of curiosity, just to see that it isn't Pureflix's first R-rated movie. I mean, this apparently seems to have been financially successful for them based on opening weekend, so I don't know if they're going to do more. I mean, not since really Passion of the Christ has there been like an R-rated Christian movie like this, though that Kevin Sorbo Second Amendment one seems like something I'd have to go see too. So, that's about it. Thanks for watching, and, I watched this shit so you don't have to.